Hello, I'm Dr. Beth Goethe.
And I'm Dr. Martha Leatherman. I'm a geriatric specialist in psychiatry.
And I'm a neuropsychologist, and I specialize in aging.
We're experts in dementia care, and we're here to provide you some information and answer some questions that we hear very commonly about dementia and other issues in aging.
Well, we're going to be talking about a very difficult issue in taking care of someone with dementia, especially people with specific frontal lobe problems. And if you've been watching these sessions and conversations, you know about frontal lobe problems, but let's review a little bit. The frontal lobes are the executive center of the brain, and that's where we have the ability to make a plan and initiate an activity, sort of see down the road and
Recognize
see how
consequences.
Yes, see the consequences, and then if consequences don't turn out the way we planned, we can shift strategies. We can understand our own limitations. We are able to organize and process information, and we can make judgments about particular issues, especially as it pertains to the consequences we were just talking about. What would be the consequences of certain actions?
And we kind of shorthand that as insight and judgment. Go back and review the frontal lobe video. It will tell you a lot more, but we're going to just shorthand that now. In some forms of dementia, and you can get this in certain kinds of vascular dementia or certain types of specific frontal lobe dementia, language, memory,
visual perception,
calculating ability, reading, all kinds of things are very well preserved. The thing that's missing is the insight and judgment and the frontal lobe functions. That person with that dementia needs a lot of help, but it's very difficult because they're intelligent, they're aware, they're just not aware of their lack of insight. So there are certain things that they cannot do reliably. For example, manage their own finances because they think it's perfectly fine to adopt the caregiver that they met yesterday and leave everything to that caregiver in the will. They don't see what's wrong with that. But they know exactly what they have in their will. They know where all their wealth is stored. They probably play the stock market and know the NASDAQ better than you do. So it's a bizarre kind of combination of really intact cognitive function in certain areas and very, very bad judgment.
and sometimes what happens is the person may make a few errors in judgment, and then the family or the caregivers will generalize that. Well, obviously we can't trust you to do anything. You're
Right.
just so demented. You would have to be severely demented to have given that gentleman your Social Security number and written a check for $10,000, Dad. You can't do things like that, so we're going to have to take everything over. And families end up asking us, so am I doing too much? Should I have done that? Should I have taken everything over? What should I let Dad or Mom do?
Or alternatively, I have told him he may not drive, he may not leave the facility, he may not have the checkbook, he does not need spending money, he needs to stay on the dementia unit. I've told him, and he won't believe me and he won't understand. Would you please explain how demented he is?
Because he'll accept what you say as a professional. But remember what we said about the frontal lobes is that that's part of the frontal lobe judgment problem, is that you can't judge your own behavior and your own needs. But again, it doesn't have to be for every single thing.
Right.
Just because you have some frontal lobe problems doesn't mean that every situation is impaired, that you're impaired for every situation or everything you might ask to get.
So let's take an example, and this is based loosely on a few patients that I've seen that I'm kind of putting together to show you the idea. But you've got a lady who lives on a dementia unit, and the other people on the dementia unit are quite impaired with memory and really are not able to have conversations and that kind of thing. And this lady says to her daughter, "I want to buy a car." And the daughter's immediate response is, we've got to make sure she's on the locked unit. She can't go out anymore. She's trying to go buy a car. It's just the judgment here. And so you need to back up and say, why do you want to buy a car? Let's engage the discussion. This situation, it turns out it's because the lady's going out with caregivers who have very small, low-to-the-ground cars. It's very difficult for her to get in the caregiver's vehicle. She doesn't mind being driven. She just wants a comfortable car to ride in. So you can see how the judgment may be impaired and appear impaired, but there's some reasons behind what somebody wants to do. So you're always looking for ways to give somebody a reasonable amount of freedom with enough constraints that they're safe. You can't put them in cotton wool.
Right. You can't box them in to the point where they're unable to do any activity or get any pleasure from life.
Because if you do that, they act out.
Exactly right.
You get a real rage response, and you're really in trouble then.
They will resist and resist. And frankly, it's uncomfortable for you, isn't it, to keep saying no all the time and to have these repeated discussions that go nowhere. So you have to consider the safety issues, sort of like, well, why do you want this particular thing, or why do you want to do that activity? And what's the worst that could happen?
What's the worst that could happen? I mean, in this situation, she was still going to have a driver. The worst that would happen is that she would spend money on a car that wouldn't get used. And in terms of safety, that's not an unsafe thing for her.
Okay.
So what's the worst that could happen? And take steps to mitigate that while allowing some autonomy. There are other situations, going for walks alone, going up to the grocery store, if it's around the corner, walking to the grocery store, that kind of thing. You'll have to play with it and understand it, but a lot of times just trying to engage in the conversation. What does this person want to get out of the activity? What are they looking for? Do they not want to be shadowed and having to have polite conversation with somebody all the time? Is that why they want to go out and walk by themselves, just some time alone, not in their room? And then find ways to make that as safe as possible and give where you can. For more answers to questions like these, our book, The Insider's Guide to Dementia Care, is available at Amazon.com.